Hello everyone, I'm Julie from the blog Yoga and Lifestyle Medicine. Welcome to this new podcast. And for those who follow me, I had published a video on my group where I had in fact explained how, thanks to an ayurvedic and low toxic dietary changes, I had managed to lower my rheumatoid factor. So, this podcast is really going to aim to share with you everything I know on the subject and everything I have been able to change in my dietary and behavioral lifestyle to be able to calm and soothe my rheumatism, which has practically disappeared in the bottom of my back since I suffer from spondylolisthesis. You have to be patient and persistent with dietary change because our body takes time to detoxify, especially if you haven't done it for years. I will explain a little bit what's going on. You need to understand that inflammatory and autoimmune diseases start in the small intestine. It's something very important because when you understand that it's your diet that plays a huge role in your inflammatory diseases, in your healing potential, and that's what I apply and which works for me. In fact, we have what we call cofactor in our food. Those cofactors are elements such as lactose or the consumption of cereals, which will accentuate this inflammatory sensitivity and which may be a genetic sensitivity given by your mother, your father. And it is important that you draw up a kind of genealogical tree or inflammatory disease on your mother's side and on your father's side to know if you have a more or less favorable genetic ground bequeathed in inheritance and with which you will develop inflammatory diseases. So, if I take my case, that's exactly what happened. For example, in my family, we have a lot of cases of rheumatoid arthritis and osteoarthritis, psoriasis, eczema, etc. The most important. Besides, my brother developed it, so I know he developed eczema. So I know that there is a genetical background in my family that is conducive to developing inflammatory diseases. I myself developed beyond rheumatism osteoarthritis at the level of lumbar 4 and lumbar 5, linked to my spondylolisthesis. It is just to say that sometimes, and we have a genetic ground that will be sensitizing and against which we cannot fight but reduce so much your cofactors. This will not necessarily cure you because we cannot change our genes, but in any case, influence them and avoid constantly entering an inflammatory state and reproducing dietary errors that will degrade our condition. Because as soon as you actually stop this diet, your inflammatory state will come back. You can do several tests on this. You will quickly realize it. For example, I stopped eating dairy products. I will explain to you later in more detail exactly what I stopped eating and when I reintroduced from time to time because I like dairy products. But there I pay for it instantly the next day. It is important to know that in the body we have several emunctories: the kidneys, the liver, the skin, the lungs, the intestines, and also the mucous membranes. The emunctories do not work properly due in part to the more modern diet because in the modern diet there have been many genetic and therefore molecular manipulation. Thus, our digestive enzymes and our mucins, which are glycoproteins that create protection for our intestinal mucous membranes, are completely lost and can no longer do their job properly to digest the large molecules, which then pass into the blood. So today, the objective of industrialists is to cultivate cereal which better yields without diseases, to have less loss of harvest and therefore more profitability. Cereal are more beautiful, more voluminous, less diseased, but in qualitative and nutritional term, the industrialists do not care since their objective is to earn as much money as possible at the expense of our health. What really matters to them is to be able to make a profit by selling in large quantities and to the detriment of nutritional quality. Results, us, we, poor human, eats this crap. Voluntary molecular modification have completely modified the DNA of wheat, among other things, and it is therefore normal that our enzymes, which have not evolved for 10,000 years, can no longer digest these new molecules. This leads to poor digestion, poor assimilation, and inevitably it pollutes our blood, our kidney, as well as the lymph, and then our tissues. Our digestive enzymes have several enemies: stress, tobacco, medical treatment, and antibiotics. And this pollution is very bad for our digestive enzymes. This modern diet leads to the weakening of our digestive enzyme because our way of life is no longer in symbiosis with respect for our human integrity and our biological rhythm. To tell you a few words about the small intestines, as you have understood, the it has a major role in autoimmune and inflammatory diseases. The small intestine is 5 to 7 meters long, than it really is, and represents an area of 30 squares meter between the folds and fold of the intestinal mucosa. So it's quite large since it's roughly equivalent to a large handball field, and we have more than 100 billion bacteria that make up our macrobiota. It is the guarantor of our good health, and we must respect them by pampering our small intestine. It is lined with a mucous membrane called the epithelium, and the epithelium is itself composed of what we call enterocytes, which are full of small cells which are just juxtaposed to each other, which will in fact create what is called the intestinal barrier. The role of the intestinal barrier is to be impermeable. Um, that is to say, not to allow large molecules and bacteria to pass into the blood so as not to contaminate our tissues. Above each enterocyte, there are what we call villi. They are a bit like the fibers of a carpet on which will come to select the element which will be digested by the intestine. The enterocytes have their own means of defense since they have a whole bunch of tools at their fingertips to be able to fight the invader. For example, the intestinal mucous membranes are carpets of immune cells such as lymphocytes, white blood cell, for example. The enterocytes form a natural barrier, and if they become distended, this is where molecules and bacteria enter in the blood. The distension is the case for celiac disease or irritable bowel syndrome or intestinal permeability. The people who will have a genetic sensitivity, in fact, it is explained in a very simple way. They will have immune cells that include a molecular marker, which name HLA and means human leukocyte antigen. And these are the glycoproteins I was telling you about earlier, and which line the intestinal mucosa. So, with an HLA type 2, it is when we recognize a cell as being exogenous to our interior. That is to say that it is a cell which will be identified as being a bacterium, as being something unhealthy for the organism. And therefore, our organism will attack it thanks to our immune system. And HLA type 1 is when we identify a cell that is part of us, so it is not attacked by our immune system. Then people who have an HLA type 2 marker on their immune cells will in fact have a communication problem between their cells. There will be erroneous messages that will be sent, and therefore, for example, a milk protein or gluten molecule will in fact be identified as harmful, as being a virus or bacteria, and our system will recognize this molecule as being an antigen, and we are going to develop our armada of cytokines, which will alarm our immune system. Except that when you use cytokines, the tight junction that stand out, you have understood it is when you have an impermeable intestine. That means that you have a problem with the tight junctions. There are also scientific studies that have shown that people who had leaky gut actually had a microbiota that was completely disorganized. For this, you have the Hypotoxic Diet created by Jean Seignalais, who is a clinician and biologist doctor who has studied for many years all that is immunology and conducts many tests on thousands of patients with high success rate. Is so that he was really convinced that rheumatism and inflammation, that everything was related to immune and rheumatic disease was linked to food. The hypoxic diet is very simple. You will have to follow several rules. First, we will put aside all dairy products and their derivatives, creams, cheese, yogurts. But on the other hand, all vegetable dairy products are to be consumed. You must reduce your salt intake because it is found in many prepared meals, and this creates an overdose of salt inside of us. And it is very important to take natural mineral salt also. I put a little bit in my meal, and I take Himalayan salt, more assimilable by the body. And you also have other salt, such as natural and unrefined sea salt, harvested manually on a layer of clay. This is the best. In fact, all the mineral and all untrace elements are kept inside. And do not take refined salt because in refined salt they had anti-caking agent which when heated turn into cyanide. I had stopped eating deli meats since they are generally full of on conservatives, salt, bad fats, and difficult to assimilate since they clog the intestines. You will also replace the whole oils with cold pressed oil, which will keep all their nutrients and all the vitamins. This can be hemp oil, flower oil, flaxseed oil, which is very good when you have problem with estrogen, coconut oil, and etc. There are plenty of oil on hand to replace. Refined oils are saturated with bad fats, and it is very important that it is cold pressed. Otherwise, it is as if you are consuming an empty oil without nutrients. For sugar, we remove all refined sugar. We will rather go for natural sugar like rapadura, which is the complete sugar, or coconut sugar, which is very good for diabetics since it has a low glycemic index. Avoid consuming cereals such as wheat, corn, rye, millet, oats. So I know it can seems hard, but the results are there for inflammation. We also eat legumes. Rice is also consumed because by trying to change its molecule, the rice manages to return to its original state and does not undergo this molecular transformation and returns to its wild state. It does not have acrylamide either. Acrylamide are molecules that modify the DNA of humans and especially during cooking. And there is a lot of acrylamide, for example, on the crust of bread, and also linked to the cooking method, and it is therefore very, very bad for the human body. Regarding the temperature in the hypotoxic diet, we exclude everything that is cooked at high temperature between 110 degrees and 180 degrees. It is from 110 degrees that there is the Maillard reaction. It is a chemical transformation that will take place and actually create new chemical bonds between carbohydrates, proteins, and amino acids. This creates what is called glycated protein, which oxidizes the body, clogs, and tires the kidneys. All this creates inflammatory states in the body, which is why we favor gentle steam cooking. You can absolutely brown your vegetables in olive oil by temporizing the vegetables, keep their crunch, their nutrients, and their prana. Prana in Ayurveda is the vital energy on the vegetable, which is respected. So, cooking your food al dente, your vegetables, will allow you to preserve the maximum of vitamin and nutrients. So, that's really the hypotoxic diet. And regarding cow's milk, it is not made for human, and since human milk is not made for cows, it makes sense. Cow's milk is very concentrated in iron and calcium, which is way too much for your enzymes. Human milk is perfectly adapted in terms of its composition for human. Cow's milk is made for the calf to develop very quickly, unlike a human who must mature very slowly and develop very slowly. A cow's milk, in terms of its composition, includes 80% casein, and casein is what we have in whey. You know, when you eat the butter, especially when making ghee, the foam that rises is casein. And a mixture, it's also a mixture of impurities that creates bloating, irritates the intestines, and sometimes it can be silent and take years to come that we do not feel the harmful effect of casein in our organism. Cow's milk, therefore, contain, like I said, 80% casein, while human milk only contains 17%. You realize the difference is quite substantial. It is only on the order of a few percentages. It can be counted in tens and tens and tens of percentage difference in terms of proteins. A cow milk also contains 32 grams of protein per liter, and human milk 9 grams of protein per liter. So we understand why it is complicated for a human to assimilate cow milk. When milk protein are split, also insulin increases to be able to digest them. So milk consumption would have a strong impact also for diabetics people. The cows are fed with fermented wheat to increase their milk yield. This is called silage. This food ferments in the absence of oxygen, and these wheats and corn acidify the food and therefore, of course, their milk. By snowball effect, will also acidify the human intestine if you drink it. And by the way, the cow are also treated with hormones, antibiotic, and all of this end up in the milk, right? So if we really become aware on that we are actors of our health, we stop milk because it really does not have anything good for you, and you can quite find other sources of calcium in plants. Calcium from animal proteins is assimilated by the body between 30 to 40% by the human body, while vegetable calcium is assimilated at 70%. You also realize this difference? The reason is that it's natural, better for your health because it can be assimilated by your body. Tofu, broccoli contain calcium, pumpkin seeds, sunflower seeds, sesame seeds, chickpeas, dried figs, etc. And unwittingly, the man will consume milk protein in his diet because when we start to look at the label and read the composition, we realize that there is lactose milk powders in everything, in dark chocolate, food preparation. In short, it's really everywhere, and sometimes you wonder why it is there. You have to hunt down this milk powder and remove it from your diet and eat as much as possible, if I may say so. Um, that is to say, eat what is not transformed, and that it is raw as much as possible, to be sure that there are no traces of lactose, which poisonous, which come to pollute us. Just like the cereal, which are no longer the same as before. Because of the structural and molecular modification on the cereals, it is no longer as well assimilated by our organism. Wheat, in particular, contains what is called gliadin. So it's a molecule that will distend the tight junction and pass more easily into the blood and the lymph, and will fold the tissues by causing an immune reaction. There are also certain short chain amino acids that will cause an influx of water and gas into the intestines. This is why, in case of intestinal permeability, we avoid eating gluten. On the other hand, the whole cereals such as spelled and small spelled do not have this problem. They have much fewer industrial objectives, and above all, they are rich in vitamins and trace elements and more easily assimilated by people who are in gluten intolerance theory. There is no gluten in spelled. If you can eating old grain bread, and when making your winter soup, for example, introducing a little spelled, like it's kind of wheat, very old wheat, into your soap, will give them consistency. So now I hope you understand more about inflammatory or autoimmune disease, how it comes, etc. So, see you soon for the next video or the podcast, and please take care of yourself and become aware of what you eat for your good health.